Hello, today I'm going to speak with Mr. Sean Domencic. Sean is involved with the Catholic worker movement, so I'm going to speak to him about that. I'm also going to speak to him briefly about Catholic politics in the United States and in general, maybe a little bit about papal encyclicals, about social justice, and how does a Catholic vote according to church teaching, and how does a Catholic live out charity in the world? And where do politics and religion meet, and should they, and how does that work? So that's coming up soon. Thank you very much. Hey, Sean, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, let me, yeah, am I coming through okay?
Uh-huh.
All right, this is a lot better than last week. So,
Awesome.
let's, I think I'm recording now, so let's just begin, okay? And we'll kind of go over what we went over last week and,
Okay, let me grab something real quick just before we start.
okay. Oh, dead air. Got them. Actually, I'm going to pause this again, and then we'll wait for Sean to come back. Okay, recording again, back here with Sean Domencic. Sean, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Brad?
Very good. So let's begin with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei,
ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Saint Ephrem, pray for us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So mixed Latin and English there. And tomorrow, I'm recording this on the 8th. Tomorrow is the feast in the on the new calendar, on the ordinary form of Saint Ephrem the Syrian. That's why I prayed through his intercession. He's one of my favorite church fathers, doctor of the church.
Yeah.
Oh, really? If anybody's watching this, you never heard of Saint Ephrem, check him out. He does theology in a different kind of way than the Greek or Latin fathers. He writes a lot of poetry, and his language is very close to Aramaic, the language of Christ. So I always love to read Saint Ephrem. So again, Sean, as I kind of hinted at, people don't know, but we were doing an interview last week, and the connection cut out. So I'm going to kind of pick up on the same questions and the same line of thought. Could you just introduce yourself and talk about your work with the Catholic worker movement and anything else you'd like to add?
Sure. Well, yeah, so my name's Sean Domencic, and I'm part of Holy Family Catholic Worker. It's a house of hospitality in Lancaster City, right by St. Joseph's, and member of this community. It's a pretty recent one, only started in this past August, but we live here in, my wife and I live here in a community. There's 7 of us right now, and live out the sort of work and mission of the Catholic worker.
Good, thank you. So I want to get into a little bit, just keep everything kind of brief, with the history of the Catholic worker. And we were talking last week, which I liked. I hope we can do it a little bit again about some things about politics. But just for yourself, so you and your wife live in the house. You're in Lancaster. It's called Holy Family.
Yes, Holy Family Catholic worker.
And so, what is day to day or week to week look like for you? Like, how does, practically speaking, when you're involved in the Catholic worker, what do you do, or how does it?
Yeah. And Catholic worker houses can really be extremely varied. There's Catholic worker farms, there's houses, and every house. There's not like an overarching organization, so there's not like a particular rule for all of them. They're all sort of, autonomous communities, and so we have, like most houses, have certain rhythms that we have as a community, just to be intentional about living together. So we have like a community meal on Monday in which everyone eats together. We have on Fridays we do roundtable discussions, so we choose a different topic each Friday, and that's sort of open to other people in the parish, the neighborhood, and such, and just have conversations on various different topics. Um, and then on Sundays we also just have some informal, hangouts. Making it a day of rest. We spend some time together, and so I'd say those is the sort of main rhythms, and then we have various other things that come up less frequently. That's what the kind of week to week looks like.
Hmm. Is this something, so for those who don't know, you've been married almost a year, correct?
Yep, coming up
So
August.
this is something that you and your wife had talked about. This is something you wanted to do for some time,
Yeah,
or?
yeah. The so our sort of discernment into the Catholic worker, it came from sort of a lot of different directions, because on the one hand, I myself had gotten really interested in Catholic social teaching, the teachings of the church on politics and economics and this kind of stuff, and really interested in what the church taught and in promoting what the church taught. And so, I've been doing some writing with an organization called Tradiste that I started. So I was really interested from that angle. And the Catholic worker is kind of like the origins of a lot of like the work of popularizing Catholic social teaching in the United States. So its founders back in the 1930s, Dorothy Day and Peter Marin, were really involved in promoting that. So that was one way in which uh, that I came into it, and we were both really affected by it. It really changed how we viewed the world and looked at things. But then from another, maybe more intimate and personal note, as a new family, thinking about our future children and everything, we were really recognizing a need for community. There's a lot of talk about sort of intentional community and that kind of thing. And the fact that there's so many forces in society that are arranged to isolate us, to atomize us, some would say, make us all kind of like our own little individual units and such. And there's been a real breakdown of like parish life and just community in our culture. I mean, this was long before COVID happened and everything, but the sort of loneliness of COVID is really just like a intensification of what's already been going on for many years. Like reading, back in the Middle Ages and in the early church and everything. Like that's not what it's like, and it's not what Christian life is meant to be like. So there was a retreat that we went on that really influenced us and convinced us of the need for intentional community to be a part of our lives as a family. And so that was also an element of it, of just recognizing the need to, to not be alone, to not be our own sort of individual atom, but to be really connected and tied to both, our own community and our parish community, and try to foster that kind of Christian community.
Good. Now, something came to me while you were speaking there. I know you spoke about you're near St. Joseph, so you and your wife attend the Latin Mass, traditional Latin Mass.
Hmm.
And I know you incorporate a lot of traditional, what we call traditional Roman Catholic spirituality. How does that play into your work in the Catholic worker movement? Can you explain a little bit about your spirituality in that sense?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think I mean, going back to Dorothy and Peter. So Dorothy and Peter were the founders of the Catholic worker movement. And for them, like, I think that a lot of people, they were very concerned about social justice and about, the many issues involved with that, whether it's labor issues or, all the other things, economic, things like, usury and banking, all these sort of, issues that we often tend to like hear that kind of stuff and lump it into like, oh, that's, politics, and it's, whenever talking about like social justice, it's sort of secular, it's leftist or something like that. But for them, their interest in all those sorts of things, in seeking a better world, as Peter Marin would say, building a new world in the shell of the old. He would always follow up that phrase. He would say, our goal is to build a new world in the shell of the old. He would say, by a philosophy so old, it looks like new. So for him, the foundations of building a better world, of social change, of transforming society, renewing it in Christ, were all very much traditional. It was really based in his medievalism in some ways. He often, looked to the Middle Ages, to the church fathers, to the prophets of Israel, for a sense of what a better world could look like. And so, that's just sort of on the philosophic basis. Like, you asked about the Latin Mass and everything. We get to, it's nice. We go to both Novus Ordo, Latin Mass alternatively. And I think, traditionalism has always been like a big part of our lives, and is very much, just being grounded in that life of prayer and that liturgical life of the church is really essential to do, the works of mercy, to do, to advocate for social justice. Because if you're not grounded in that, then those things can easily just kind of take over, like you can lose the sort of spiritual connection of those things, and they just become, there's, as Dorothy sometimes called, the heresy of works, like the idea that we can fix the world just by being good people if we do the right things, without recognizing that our understanding of what the right things are and our strength to do them comes from grace, and grace comes from the sacraments, from prayer, and having that rich liturgical life. So I'd say the connection with the Catholic worker is that it was really important and central to the lives of Dorothy and Peter as the movement's founders. And so I think that's something we've really tried to just to live out in our own spiritual lives.
Good, thank you. I think that's a good segue. So let's, if you could speak about who are Dorothy Day and Peter Moran, and how did the Catholic worker begin? You could go into
Sure.
that.
Yeah. The uh the basic story, Dorothy, she's a convert to Catholicism. Her book, The Long Loneliness, is this great tale of her conversion, very popular. And she came from sort of socialist and anarchist circles in New York City, before she converted. And so she was very interested in social justice and this sort of stuff, but definitely not religious. Lived a very sinful life, a very pleasure-seeking, kind of life. Had a child outside of marriage, and when she converted, that sort of changed everything for her. She left the man that she was living with, the father of her child, because he refused to marry her. And she had been a writer before, writing for various publications, including the communist newspaper in the U.S. But started writing for some Catholic places, and was kind of trying to find her place. She still cared about the poor, still cared about social justice, but was trying to find a place for that in the church. And she was covering for Commonweal, a Catholic newspaper, this big communist rally down in Washington, D.C., and feeling that conflict. And afterwards, she prayed in the National Basilica down there, and prayed for some guidance in this. And then went back to New York City, where she was living. And then Peter Moran, who got in touch with her from the editor of Commonweal, showed up in her door. Now, Peter Moran was from France originally. He was a peasant there who came to Canada and then the U.S. as an itinerant worker. And he was just, he didn't get a doctorate or anything like that. He didn't go to any university, but he was deeply studied. He really believed in scholarship and in reading. Read every book he could get his hands on, and really studied and understood the social encyclicals of the popes. And that was the foundation of his sort of vision. And so Dorothy hadn't really been familiar with that, but Peter Moran showed up on her door and started giving her this sort of program and vision of what needs to happen based on these encyclicals, and telling her about all these, the teachings of the popes, the sort of ideal of the common good from St. Thomas Aquinas, the church fathers, the prophets of Israel, and all these things, how they applied God's justice to society. And that was really the inspiration there. She heard that and began putting it into action. And the two of them, they started a house of hospitality. They started a very popular newspaper called The Catholic Worker. And that was the foundation of a huge movement that now, there's hundreds of, or at least well over 100, I think a little bit shy of 200 houses across the United States, as well as many farming communities as well.
Good. So you said Dorothy Day, and so she is a servant of God. I think we
Yeah.
said that we didn't get recorded. So could you just explain, for those who aren't aware, how that works on the steps to
Yeah, so she's
canonization?
a servant of God, which means that, her local bishop has approved her cause. And, there's people gathering, like, for the Vatican requires you to gather like everything that she's written. So that's been sent to the Vatican fairly recently, I think. And then, the next step would be for her to be declared venerable. And then after that, there would be 2 miracles required to make her a blessed and then a saint, respectively. So that's sort of the path that she's on. So,
Mhm. Good. Thank you for that explanation about the Catholic worker. What I would like to speak about now, which again we were talking about last week, is uh, you talked about the church's social teaching and how this how this can bleed over into politics. I'm going to specifically talk about American politics. Okay, and
mhm.
I want to relate it. See if this makes sense. So I like that quote you said from Peter Moran. So something so, how do you put it? Something so old that it seems new.
Mhm.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, philosophy so old
Yeah.
it seems like new.
So very good. So I've been doing a lot of reading different political philosophers lately, different things, and looking into, because to me it seems right now that in modern American politics, and I guess it's been this way for a while, modern American politics, whether you're speaking of the Republicans or the Democrats or whatever, they seem to be two sides of the same coin.
Hmm.
And the way that they deal with, well, things that we're talking about, the way they deal with the world, the way they deal with families, the way they deal with the poor. This liberal, and I'm going to use liberal as libertas, the almost like a cult of the individual, like you said at the
Hmm.
beginning. This idea that we get from the Enlightenment, that there is an evolution in society, or that we must constantly be progressing. So there has to be a new agenda. We've gone through the New Deal. We've gone through, whatever the social program is, and it's not really curing what ails us. And
Hmm.
so you touched upon, when you were just speaking about the liturgy and your own spirituality, you touched upon traditionalism. I think we need to return to the wisdom of our ancestors, to the wisdom of the medievals, the wisdom of the fathers, the wisdom going back. Um, and so let me get to this first. So I'm going to go, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But let me ask you a question, in your opinion, because I asked this to a group of men the other week. How, and this is completely, I'd like to hear what you said, and then I'd like to get into some other things briefly. If you're a Catholic right now, let's just say you're, because we're both men, let's say you're a devout Catholic man. How are you supposed to vote right now? Or how are you supposed to engage politically? What should you do?
Hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah. And so, looking at that, I obviously one of the most popular arguments I think is to say, well, the Democratic Party in the US, almost everyone, supports abortion, and abortion is the preeminent issue, and the bishops of the US say that. And it is, it's a very grave evil, right? Like strikes at the very heart of the family. And so, people say, well, because of that, you should vote Republican to prevent that evil. Then the other side of the coin is to say, well, that's one particular issue, and I'm speaking, from like a devout position. I'm not counting. There's people out there who just deny church teaching. I'm not speaking to that. I'm talking about like even like people who really care about it. Like I think that there are people who really care about church teaching that say yes, abortion is wrong, but you should vote for the Democrat because there's all these other issues. There's the environment, there's workers and just wages, there's immigrants, and there's poverty and all these other things. And the church has teachings about all those things. And the Democrats are closer to what the church teaches on those things, people would say. And so I think that, you know, the way that I think about it is that, while there's merit to both those arguments, I can understand how someone would be in that headspace on either side. The ideas of both of the major parties in the U.S., Republican and Democrat, are so far from what the church actually teaches that, while they might signal that they're in favor of this issue or that issue, if you look at actually what happens, it's nowhere close to what the church is teaching. You look at abortion and the family and contraception and such, and it's not like the Republican Party has a long history of successfully fighting back against those issues. When Republicans are in power, the key thing is generally tax cuts and such. And then you look at on the Democratic side, they might talk about poverty and about the environment and about immigrants, but then you look at what actually happens. Sorry, there's some noise. you look at what actually happens, and the policies don't line up at all. I mean, the key things that generally get pushed through are, similarly, sort of welfare reform programs, and often a lot of, like sort of progressive anti-family, gay marriage type stuff, right? So again, there's really Catholics, I think, should feel politically homeless in the U.S., at least when it comes to the major parties. Now, there's a third party called the American Solidarity Party, which I vote for. It's a third party, so obviously it's not going to be winning presidential elections. Um, but I think one of the key things that the Catholic worker actually really points to in terms of politics is the need to kind of refocus our political vision. Like, we as Christians aren't really supposed to trust that, a pagan society, is going to, um, you know, be the source of any kind of salvation or fruit. And you, like you're mentioning, that both parties are rooted in liberalism, right? In the classical liberalism of the founding fathers, right? Like the U.S. is not a Catholic country. It's not grounded in those ideas or principles at all. And so, when I'm not saying people shouldn't vote, and not even saying that there shouldn't be, political movements that Catholics get involved with, but that nothing really exists right now. I mean, the American Solidarity Party, again, is a small thing, but Catholic worker really wants to emphasize that we as Christians can be involved in social reconstruction, in political justice, beginning immediately. We don't need to like wait for politicians to do things for us and stuff. Like, we can feed the poor. We can, clothe the naked and visit the sick and everything. And that, we really need to be living out. Like, one of the problems that we have is that we think that, like, we can just kind of live our privately Christian lives and then, live basically like how everyone else does, be money seeking and be, selfish in how we spend and consume, and be, sort of centered on our own status rather than on building up community and making sacrifices for our community. And then, just vote the right way a few times a year and expect everything to work. That's not really the Christian vision. Like, the Christian vision of how we should be living our lives requires everything. And I think that's a key thing that I think is really important about the Catholic worker is, there's a real need to act, now, and to begin living out the gospel. And then hopefully, as more and more Christians come to do that, we can then begin to have some real change and success in terms of, say, ending abortion, or ending, unjust wars, or all of these other issues that never seem to get any better in society.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. There's a lot there. Quickly
Yeah, no,
repeat.
sorry.
That was the, no, it's very good. What was the name of the party again? The American Solidarity Party?
Solidarity Party, yeah.
Um, yeah, so as you were speaking, I was reminded of a few things. When we're talking about us and I agree with you. I agree with that sentiment that we feel like we're orphans. I feel
Hmm.
like I'm politically an orphan. Um,
Hmm.
on some things, I'm not going to get into the details, but I'm an extremist, depending on who you speak to, on both sides. Or you're speaking to
Yeah.
a normie Republican or a normie Democrat. I'm an extremist
Hmm.
this way or that way. And while you were speaking, I was reading this right before we began. This is from the Office of Readings from yesterday. Saint Ignatius, his letter to the Romans.
Hmm.
This one sentence, he says. For our Lord Jesus Christ, now that he has returned to his Father, has revealed himself more clearly. Our task is not one of producing persuasive propaganda. Christianity shows its greatness when it is hated by the world. Um, and so, to carry that on, we can't be concerned about making friends with political parties or cutting deals. And I think, and I have a few more questions. You spoke about the way we relate to families, the way we relate to the poor. Like, we should have a preferential option for the poor, the way we should deal with those. One of the, as someone who speaks, or as a catechist, as a teacher, I speak to people about life issues, about abortion. One of the accusations that's often leveled is you only care about the baby as long as he or she's in the mother's womb. And then once they're born, you don't care about the poverty that they're born into. You don't care about feeding them, educating them. You don't care that they live in squalor or, pollution or whatever like that. So I think that touches, like you said, about and I think that's very important. We expect to vote maybe a couple times a year, or for some of us, once every 4 years.
Hmm.
We're voting for the good guy or the bad guy or whatever we think we're doing, and we expect there to be change. Um, and really, what we need to do is do what Christ said in the Gospel of Matthew. If you see someone naked, you clothe them. If you see someone hungry, you feed them. And we can do that now. We can live as Christ in the world now. So, how important, and you've already touched upon this, so for those who aren't aware, the phrase, what we call in Catholic social teaching, we call subsidiarity. Um,
Hmm.
how important is subsidiarity, or acting as close to home as possible? Um, could you speak about that for a moment?
Yeah, and I think something important about subsidiarity is that kind of this, like the meaning of it can often be confused because, really the sort of meaning of it, I've heard a great phrase to express it as, as small as possible, as large as necessary, right? So subsidiarity is the principle that different spheres should take care of what is proper to them, what belongs to them, and so, sometimes it gets misinterpreted to mean like, oh, only the local stuff matters, bigger political issues doesn't matter. Like sometimes it almost becomes libertarian where it's like, oh, like, yeah, the government basically shouldn't exist. Like everything should just be done, by individuals or something like that. But rather what it really means is that, there should be these many levels. You should have the society of the family, right? And then you should kind of have the, community or village that's around the family, and then the city, and then, the nation, and then the region, or even the world, right? Like all of those are levels of subsidiarity, and they all have different things that they, are involved with. So, when it comes to an issue like, climate change or something like that, that's a global phenomenon. That's something that has to be dealt with by, agreements and powers, on that higher level. But then, when it comes to things like, you know, taking care of those in need, right? Or even supplying for one's needs, right? This is a, great example of something in Catholic social teaching that, often like when the sort of left in the U.S., Democrats talk about like poverty relief. It's often in terms of like, well, the state should give you welfare and stuff. And state welfare is not a bad thing in all cases, right? In emergencies, it's necessary. The other thing about subsidiarity is that if one level fails, then a higher level should like step in to help it, right? But ideally, the subsistence of a family, the being able to feed itself, care for its children and its future, belongs to the level of the family, right? And so rather than thinking that in an ideal society like the state, this is sort of the socialist vision, like the state takes care of everyone, and provides for everyone's needs. Rather, families should be able to actually own, productive property. There should be more widespread ownership in society, and that's what, part of what should allow for, people to sustain their needs and such, people being paid a just wage and that kind of thing. So I think that's a key aspect of like, subsidiarity doesn't really fit into either visions of like, like both, capitalism, right, where you just have this giant world market, these giant mega corporations, right, that, privately owned by, somebody who owns billions and billions of dollars, right? Like that's not widespread ownership, right? It's not subsidiary. It doesn't have like the family as a real unit. Um, and likewise, the sort of socialist vision where you have like the big socialist state that everyone works for and everyone is provided for. The same problem is there. You don't have subsidiary societies, and it's not just about like the family, existing at all. It's also about having other levels. Like think about, we that nowadays the way that laws work, the way like zoning laws work in the U.S. You know, you basically have no ability. Like you can't have, and you don't really have anymore local villages in the way that you used to, or local, cities that are able to kind of control their own affairs and have their own culture. Like everything becomes sort of mass produced. All of our culture is mass produced, all of our transportation, even like instead of going down, to a local store and buying food in a sort of local market, you get it from Walmart, and Walmart is shipping it in on giant freight trucks all around the country and from ships all around the world. A focus on having these proper levels, the family, the village, the city, and not to say that you shouldn't have anything that exists on the more national or even global level, but that they all need to be there. And I think that's like, I mean, that's it's complex, and I'm sure I could talk a lot more about it, but diving into that kind of Catholic vision of subsidiarity and that rich social life that we're supposed to have that has really been destroyed by modern society by forces both in the left and the right, I think is something that is really missed by a lot of people trying to understand Catholic social teaching, because so often it does just get boiled down to thinking that we need to oppose abortion, gay marriage, or thinking that we need to care about the environment and the poor. But either way, it's always about the sort of national level doing these things. So that's kind of the political way of looking at it. There's also other aspects of just our responsibilities, like our need to act in that way, to begin doing the things that a family or community or village should do. So hope that's a helpful brief summary.
Yeah, that's very good. I like the way you explain, because often when we hear subsidiarity, we just think like as local as possible, which can be the case, but you're talking about a well-ordered hierarchy of responsibility. And I like how you spoke about if one level fails, that there's the safeguard in place. So we avoid anarchy at one end, and we avoid whatever you want, global tyranny or globalization on the other end.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you related that very good, because I lament that all the time. There's no villages. There's no the small town is dead. The village is dead. The village elders are dead. The just all of that. We are no longer connected to our food source. Most of us, and we're no longer connected to each other. Just a blasé gray of everything. Very good. I think I'm gonna get you out here in a second. Sum up with a couple things that I was thinking about. So, in your opinion, we touched on this a little bit. So I'll just throw a couple questions at you, and you tell me what you think.
Sure.
Doesn't have to be too in depth. Can a Catholic? I'm just going to we'll speak about Catholic. Can a Catholic be a socialist?
I'd say no. Just because, I mean, there's a lot of things in the social teaching that the popes talk about that are condemned of socialism. I mean, it's important to understand what socialism means, and that can get into a whole other conversation. But if we understood what it means in terms of what the popes are saying, then no.
Good. Okay, good answer. Next question. Can a Catholic be a capitalist?
I'd say no to that as well. And same thing. It's all about like understanding what those words mean, because they're so often thrown around incorrectly. But yeah.
Good. Well, that was very succinct, very good. And when you're speaking, I'm reminded of I believe it was written by Paul VI. I can't remember the name of the letter. He talks about the role of the government, or the duty of the government, the state is for justice. The duty of the church is charity, but the prophetic calling of the church is a call to justice as well. To sum it up, we know, and this is turning a lot about politics, but this is very good and related. We know as Catholics, we don't truly, the Catholic vision is never truly a break between church and state, separation of church and state in that way. Again, this is just a little bit of, because you've had a lot of good points. What do you think should be the organic relationship, or how should church and state relate to each other?
Yeah, so I think that's an important one, because it's easy to misinterpret it. Now, ideally, and the popes have talked about this, that the state should ultimately be subordinate to the church, right? But what that means has to be clear, because some people interpret that and they think, oh, that means like theocracy or something, like the pope is like the ruler of the world, or something like that. But what that means is that the church has a teaching. The church has divine revelation. It both interprets natural law, and also the truths that Christ clarifies about what mercy and charity look like, right? And so the key thing there is that politics isn't a separate thing from religion, right? Like that's the sort of key idea of liberalism, right? And you hear this again on both sides. You'll hear, Democrats, whenever you talk about, say, like, if you oppose abortion, if you oppose gay marriage, they would say, like, oh, well, your religion has nothing to do with politics, right? Don't forget your religion in my politics or whatever. But then on the other side, you hear the exact same thing when you say, like, oh, well, there should be regulations on the market, or we should make sure that people are paid just wages, or we should prevent the destruction of the environment. The reason we believe those things and have those as convictions are because of the church, right? Because the church teaches of our need to care for creation, our need to prevent theft, which is really what is happening with unjust wage, our need to care for the poor, the lowly, the sick, and so and on that side too, you'll hear people say, like, oh, well, don't put your religious beliefs in economics. Your religious beliefs don't belong in the market or in economics. That's a science. Religion has its own sphere. And it's important to realize that religion is part of everything. Like, God's truth extends to the whole world. He created every part of the universe. There's no part of the world that isn't subordinate to him. And so that, I think, is really the key idea, that we need to reject this liberal understanding, whether it's the sort of the liberal idea of the states that you see, especially in the left, or the sort of liberal idea of the economy or the market that you see on the right. um, all of it belongs to God. Christ is king over all of it. And so all of it needs to listen to what the church has to say on these topics.
Good, thank you very much. So what you're telling me is, I, as a human being, is not something to be divided up into a political animal or a religious animal. That
Can you hear me?
religion influences everything. And I've told students this recently: be careful when you hear politicians talking about uh, not freedom of religion, but they'll say you have freedom of worship, um, because religion really touches all areas of life. Um, Looks like we lost Sean. That is too bad. Let me see if I can. Sean, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, you said I'm frozen. It looked like you were frozen to me. So
I
let's
see.
hopefully that it turns out.
Yeah.
We'll wrap it up there. This is a very very good. I know you have a lot more you could say. I have a lot more I could say about it. That's a very good overview in brief of what the Catholic worker movement is, a little bit about Catholics and politics. That's what I've been looking a lot into lately. How do we participate in the political realm? What is the role of a Christian in society? How do we look at the different political philosophies in light of the church's social teaching? Um, Good. Sean, I know you got to go. Anything else you want to add, or?
Well, if I could maybe just
Yeah.
recommend, for anyone interested in learning more about this kind of stuff, there's so many good resources out there. And I just want to mention that a lot of the sort of mainstream resources about Catholic social teaching are often very watered down because of that issue that, we mentioned with the sort of right and left, that it's often kind of filtered through that lens. And so, some really great things. I mean, I write at Tradiste, so people can go check that out. It's a podcast blog. It has, various essays on it. There's a great resource. I'm friends with the guys over at New Polity. New Polity, they have their own podcast as well, and a lot of really great essays and articles that they publish a magazine as well. That's fantastic, and are really dedicated to just listening to what the church says and not falling into those sort of errors on either side. Um, and then the other thing that in terms of the Catholic worker, whether someone wants to learn more about like the sort of political vision of the Catholic worker or just the life of it. I mean, there's Catholic worker houses all over, and people are certainly welcome to visit here or anywhere else. Um, but the writings of Dorothy Day and Peter Marin are really great. You can find stuff on the Catholic Worker website, and Dorothy has all sorts of things that are written. But Peter Marin, there's a great collection that came out fairly recently called The Forgotten Radical Peter Marin, and it's just a collection of all of his easy essays. They're very readable, and that I would definitely recommend to people looking to understand the movement and the ideas of it more.
Thank you. And just, I'll put a link to it. So if anybody's watching this, Tradiste is Tradistae.
Yep, that's right.
Tradiste.com if they want to check that out. And good. So, Sean Domencic, thank you very much for your time. And we'll wrap it up here. Let's say a glory be, and then we'll end the recording.
Sure.
Nome Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut erat in principio, et nunc et semper et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Sacred Heart of Jesus, have mercy on us. Immaculate Heart of Mary, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Thank you very much, Sean.
Yeah, thank you.